My top tips for getting a good rank in FPL this season. I finished inside the top 10,000 over the past 4 seasons, and today I'm going to take you through my top 5 pieces of advice you need to take into this season with FPL getting more and more competitive, with more and more people becoming engaged. These are the things you need to know if you want to do well in FPL this season. What is up, everyone? Harry here. Before we dive in, 1,000 likes is the aim. Subscribe if you are new around here. And I realize I haven't plugged my charity mini league yet. There's a link in the description and there's a link above as well. If you want to join, I donate £100 plus 10p for everyone who beats me in that league at the end of the season to a charity. So make sure you're in that if you want to raise some money for a good cause. But today we're going to have a look at my top 5 tips for FPL going into the upcoming season. Of course, with ranks over the past few seasons, I hope I'm a little bit well informed to give you a bit of advice and to talk about some things that I take in and I think are really important and just sort of the fundamentals, the building blocks of a strong FPL season. Of course, at the end of the day, you've got to buy the right players, you've got to captain the right players, you've got to score the most points. But there are a few things that you can do along the way that can potentially help you to do that. The first of which, and I think the most important thing, is planning. Nowadays, with the 5 free transfers that we spoke about in the new rules video from the other day, planning is going to be even more important. Knowing when you want to try and build up transfers, knowing when you want to try and make a wholesale load of transfers, knowing when the fixture swings are, knowing when the blanks and doubles are, is going to be even more important because of this ability to be able to pivot your team around those sort of game weeks much more than we've been able to do in the past. It also means if you plan well, with the ability to have up to 5 free transfers, you shouldn't really be taking any hits at the moment. Now, of course, if there's injuries or if there's big things that change, yes, we will be forced into taking hits. And I'm going to say we will have those moments at points during the season. But generally, you shouldn't need to take hits as a general rule of thumb because of the planning that you should do and the building up of 5 free transfers as well. With there being less double and blank game weeks this season, it also means we will need to be less reactive. The chances of there being a big double announced, a big blank game week suddenly announced that throws us off and means we've got to change our strategy completely are less because of the way that the FA Cup fixtures have been scheduled. So with less blanks and doubles, it means looking at the fixtures, planning ahead when your team might look good, what weeks it might look bad, is definitely going to be more and more important this season. If you don't plan your team ahead and you look at 1 or 2 game weeks, you will eventually get to the point where you're forced to play your wild card. You're forced to play your free hit earlier than you want to, and naturally it will fall you behind to the other people who are planning ahead. And with so many people being engaged in FPL at the moment and more people focusing on it, doing this planning going forward, if you don't fall into the bucket where you are planning your team for future weeks, you will fall behind those people now. Now, to build on that a little bit is flexibility. So just because you have a plan and just because you're planning ahead doesn't mean you shouldn't be flexible as well. With FPL being more different this season than we've had practically in any season over the past 5 years, with the addition of a mystery chip, which we'll get in January, of course, with the changes to the bonus points and, of course, the 5 free transfers as well, we don't quite know how it will affect the way that we play the game. So particularly early on this season, you will need to be flexible. You might need to change formation. You might need to change players that you're considering buying. You might need to think, okay, I don't want to take as many short-term punts, because I know that rolling my transfers is going to be so important. Now, booking transfers in early on in the season is one thing I absolutely hate because it massively restricts the flexibility you can have with your squad. The amount of people that I will see going early on into the season that will say, for example, I'm not going to own Cole Palmer in game week 1 because he plays against Manchester City. And then I'm going to own Foden, I'm going to own Saka. And then in game week 2 or 3, I'm going to make that sideways transfer from Foden or Saka into Palmer. Now, that's just an example, but there will be loads of you considering booking in early transfers. Booking in transfers as you get later on in the season is okay if they're forced into a double or a blank. But early on in the season, there will be players who perform well, players who don't perform well, just based off 1 week or 2 weeks that you might want to start buying. And having a booked in transfer where you are selling a good player for another good player is never something that tends to work out well. Now, some of you might have stories where it works out well, but generally booking in transfers is something I absolutely advise not doing early on in the season, and don't plan to play a really early wildcard either. A lot of people will say they'll play game weeks 1, 2, 3 and they'll wildcard. I generally don't like that. If things go horribly wrong, yes, you can reactively do it and be flexible in that, but a wildcard shouldn't be something that you are forced into because it will reduce your flexibility further down the line as well. So do as much planning, do as much forward thinking as you can, but things change very quickly in FPL. Players find form, players drop out of form, fixtures change. So don't lock in those plans completely. Have the ability to change things depending on what happens as well. Advice number 4 is to pick nailed players. The amount of times I see people considering players who are rotation prone, get 60, 70 minute subs every week, it isn't a good strategy for FPL. Now, you don't necessarily get rewarded in terms of actual points for buying players who play minutes over that 70, 80. But in the Premier League, 25% of goals are scored between the 76th and 90 minutes of matches. So if you are picking players like a Trossard, like a Martinelli, potentially like a Doku who get subbed off early, as good as they might be when they're on the pitch, you're going to be missing out effectively on 25% of the goals that are scored in the Premier League, which is a crazy amount. So have players who are going to go the distance in games, because when they are chasing goals late on, yes, they are likely to be on the pitch. Now, if you have a player who gets subbed off because they're 3-0 up, yes, they might be involved, and that's not a problem. But if it's a close game, you want your players to be on late on, because also if it's a close game and they score the winning goal, that is really good for bonus points as well. How many times have we had players in our teams that get to 80 minutes, it's 1-1, they score, and not only do they get the 5 for the goal if they're a midfielder, but they rock up with 3 bonus points on top of that, and it is a massive, massive change to your points for that week. So pick players who play 90 minutes, and pick players who are going to start every week. Pick players who you know and you're not going to stress about when the team sheet comes out that they're going to be on it. When Champions League comes around, when there's fixture congestion at Christmas, when there's Champions League into the second half of the season, when there's cup games and everything like that, you don't want to be having players in your team that every week you're worried about how many minutes they play in Europe. You're worried about whether the team sheet's going to come out and they're going to be on it. Now, Haaland's not going to play every game. Salah's not going to play every game. But generally, they're pretty nailed players. You don't want to buy players who they are competing with their spot. So when they get to a European fixture, they aren't going to be starting every game. A big example last season was Aston Villa. There were 2 cases of it. First of all was at left back with Alex Moreno and Luca Dean. Practically a different one played in every single game. And then sort of on the wing for them as well, Leon Bailey and Diaby played half the games each, and it was a massive minefield. The data for them was really good. Their baseline was really good because when they were on the pitch, they were fantastic, but they weren't on the pitch enough, either starting games or staying on long enough for them to be viable picks. An example again we've got here is Odegaard over someone like a Trossard or a Martinelli. Odegaard's minutes are fantastic. He is on there late on in games, creating chances. That is a much better pick, despite how good Trossard or Martinelli might be when they get on the pitch. It's just not enough security for me. Now, pick number 4 is something that might be a little bit controversial, and I know some people like to play FPL in an exciting way, and that is absolutely the aim, to have fun while playing the game. Now, what causes you to have fun playing the game might be different. So for me, having fun is scoring points and having players that do well. Others for you, it might be finding that differential. Now, don't get me wrong, having a differential in my team who scores really well is an amazing feeling, but points are the goal at the end of the day. And one big thing I see is people buying differentials, particularly early on in the season, just for the sake of buying them. Sometimes boring players are good to have in your team. At the end of the season, if you want to go for differentials in the final 5-10 weeks to try and make up the last bit of ground you've got, then absolutely fine. But early on in the season, I don't think it's really necessary. You should be picking players, obviously, that you expect to score the most points. If that is someone who is 70% owned, or that is someone that is 10% owned, it doesn't really matter. But if you do have that player out of your team that is 70% owned, you do run the risk that they do well and you fall massively behind. We have all had it where you don't own a player for a week and you think, hopefully I can get by and hopefully they don't score, and they go and bang in a hat-trick, and you spend the next 5 or 6 weeks trying to make up ground. Now, you don't have to win every single week in FPL. You don't have to be scoring points every single week to do well. You need to be getting maybe 25, 30 green arrows to get a good rank at the end of the season. Ownership is a part of FPL. It shouldn't be used just to pick the highest owned players, but it should be used in making your decisions. Whether that is attacking and going for a player who is low owned, knowing the risk that you have, or it is shielding yourself from a player who you know has good fixes coming up. You know a lot of people are buying, and if they do really well and you don't own them, they're going to score a lot of points. They're going to go up in value as well, so you end up losing value, and it will set you back as well. So don't be scared to have a boring pick in your team. Don't be scared to pick a player that other people are buying. if there is a differential that you really like and you think is going to do well, not just because they're a differential, pick a player and pick the players that you expect to score the most points. Unfortunately, sometimes the players that we expect to score the most points are the players that other people expect to score the most points, and they end up with the highest ownerships. But don't let that put you off, because points are points at the end of the day. Whether they are 70% owned or whether they're 10% owned, the more points you get, the better. And then tip number 5, just a few other things that I really think are changing at the moment. So the first one is be available at the deadline. Early team news, as much as you might not like it, is a massive part of the way we play FPL at the moment. Knowing a player starts, knowing team sheets for clubs that rotate is a massive part of playing the game. It might not seem a big deal in any specific week, but if you get that early team news 9-10 times throughout the season and you change your team, you change your starting 11 accordingly, and other people don't, it will have an impact on your rank at the end of the season. For example, if we got at some point last season, Haaland wasn't going to start and you didn't captain him and you moved on to Salah, who was going to start, and other people captained Erling Haaland, it will have an impact on your rank at the end of the season, and it will have a positive rank. Now, you can't always be available at the deadline for the streams, for the Twitter to see what people are posting, but it is beneficial if you can do it. And unfortunately, as much as people don't like it, it is a massive part of the way that we play FPL. Penalties are not luck is what's up next. Okay, yeah, you might get Cole Palmer scoring 9 penalties last season, but generally picking penalty takers is a good idea because they have that major extra route to points that we've seen over the past few years. How many of the top scoring players in FPL have been penalty takers? Palmer, Salah, Haaland have dominated FPL in recent seasons, all of which have been penalty takers for their club. And don't let it put you off. Bruno Fernandes, for example, is a player who gets a lot of hate, but he's on penalties and it can be a massive route to points as well. Chip strategy is up next, with doubles and blanks being less than they have this season. Targeting the doubles is a little bit less important, but it does mean if you can nail them, it will do really well. There will be doubles that don't go as well as you want them to. There were many last season. However, if you remember game week 34, the Crystal Palace double, where some of us went in more on Palace and other people thought it was a little bit of a trap. There are situations like that where it can massively change your season, how well a double goes. And when you play those chips, your free hit, your triple captain, your bench boost, or even your mystery chip when it gets announced, it could have a massive impact on your season. So don't let bad double game weeks of the past or bad chip usage in the past put you off. Planning chips and planning for the doubles is massively, massively important. Now, one thing I see a lot of people saying is they have one bad fixture in their midfield. Should you sell him? Good picks can score points in bad fixtures. Yes, you play against Man City or Arsenal, you might be less likely to score a hat-trick than if you're playing an Ipswich, a Southampton or a Leicester this season. But don't go selling a good asset, a Palmer, a Foden, a Saka, a Gordon, an Isak, a Watkins, a Haaland, a Salah, just because they have 1 or 2 bad games. You're better off having these players in your team with a bad fixture than maybe a differential who has a weaker fixture. Because not only that, after those hard games, you want them back in your team anyway. Don't miss the deadlines. Obviously, having your team locked in for every single week, knowing what your lineup is very important. Changing that captaincy, changing your bench. And then the big one, chasing value versus trying to get that early team news. With early team news at the deadline and injury news becoming more and more available before deadlines, I am chasing value much more every season than I have done in the past. A few years ago, 3-4 years ago, where early team news wasn't a big thing, I would make early transfers during the week to gain that 0.1, gain that 0.2 value as much as I possibly could. However, knowing that my players are starting at the weekend, knowing that they are fit and available, is becoming more and more important to me, and I'm delaying my transfers much more than I would. Now, if you're going to get priced out of transfers, then potentially move early. But if the money and actual transfers you're willing to make is fine, you just might lose 0.1 or 0.2 further down the line. I generally think at the moment, because of the amount of injuries that we are having, the early team news and injury news as a whole is more important than chasing value. Now, this is particularly important later on in the season where we have a lot of value. Early on, you can understand that chasing value can be a bit important, but I generally prefer information over chasing that value. So some top tips to hopefully get you the best boost. We'll have a few more things and players to consider over this week as well. Apologies for the lack of uploads. I was at a wedding over the weekend, but I'm here available all week, all the way up to the season as well. So there's going to be plenty of videos for you as well. So if you have enjoyed the video, please don't forget to like, Subscribe if you are new around here. Join the league code as well. Thank you all so much for watching. Like and subscribe before you go, and I'll be back again very soon.